I wish to stop.
When most people hear the word Crusades, they think of knights marching toward Jerusalem. They picture battles in the deserts of the Middle East and the struggle for control of the Holy Land. But far from Jerusalem, another crusading frontier was emerging, one that would reshape the history of Northern Europe. Along the shores of the Baltic Sea lived a collection of peoples who had resisted Christianization longer than almost any other region in Europe. Their societies were diverse, their traditions deeply rooted, and many continued to practice forms of pagan religion while much of the continent had already converted to Christianity. Beginning in the late 12th century, popes, bishops, kings, and military orders turned their attention northward. What followed was a series of campaigns now known as the Northern Crusades. These wars were fought across the territories of present-day Estonia, Latvia, Lithuania, and parts of Poland and Russia. Christianity had a major impact on the foundation of the Europe we know today. The Apostle Paul back in the day didn't realize it, but he was making a voyage that was going to change an entire continent forever. Religion was only one part of the story. Political ambition, territorial expansion, economic opportunity, and control of trade routes all played important roles in driving the conflicts forward. Over the next 2 centuries, crusading armies would conquer lands, build castles, establish new states, and permanently alter the balance of power in the Baltic region. Some peoples would be subdued, others would resist for generations. Before the Crusaders arrived, the Baltic region was a diverse mosaic of cultures and tribes. Dense forests covered much of the land, while rivers served as major transportation routes. Communities were often organized around local chieftains rather than centralized kingdoms. Many Baltic and Finnic peoples practiced forms of pagan religion. Sacred groves, natural sites, and ancestor worship played important roles in spiritual life. Religious traditions varied from tribe to tribe, but most were deeply connected to nature. At the same time, Christian Europe was expanding. By the 12th century, kingdoms such as Denmark, Sweden, and Poland had largely embraced Christianity. Church leaders increasingly viewed the pagan Baltic peoples as targets for missionary activity. Trade linked the Baltic region to the wider European world. Merchants exchanged furs, wax, amber, timber, and other goods. Coastal settlements grew in importance as commercial networks expanded. Missionaries attempted to convert local populations peacefully. Some achieved limited success, but resistance was common. Many tribes viewed foreign priests as representatives of outside powers seeking influence over their lands. By the end of the 12th century, religious conversion and political ambition became intertwined. The stage was set for military intervention. By the year 1200, the effort to convert Livonia had largely failed. Missionaries had established a foothold along the Daugava River, but outside a few settlements, Christian authority remained weak. Local Livonian chiefs often accepted baptism only when it was politically useful, then abandoned Christianity once the immediate pressure disappeared. By the year 1200, the effort to convert Livonia had largely failed. Missionaries had established a foothold along the Daugava River, but outside a few settlements, Christian authority remained weak. Local Livonian chiefs often accepted baptism only when it was politically useful, then abandoned Christianity once the immediate pressure disappeared. The man determined to change this situation was Bishop Albert of Buxtehude. Arriving in Livonia in 1200, Albert understood that missionaries alone would never secure the region. He returned to Germany and recruited armed crusaders, promising them the same spiritual rewards that participants received in campaigns to the Holy Land. In 1201, Albert established the city of Riga near the mouth of the Daugava River. The location was strategically chosen. Whoever controlled Riga controlled access to one of the most important river routes into the interior. It also provided a secure harbor where reinforcements and supplies could arrive from Germany. The Crusaders' first objective was not the conquest of all Livonia. Their immediate goal was survival. Small Christian settlements were isolated and vulnerable. Local tribes could attack suddenly and disappear into forests before a response could be organized. To counter this threat, the Crusaders began constructing fortified positions along key waterways. Castles became the backbone of the campaign. Unlike temporary military camps, these fortifications allowed Crusaders to maintain a permanent presence. Garrisons could patrol surrounding territory, collect tribute, and launch operations deeper inland. Each new castle became a stepping stone for further expansion. In 1202, Albert founded the Livonian Brothers of the Sword. The new military order consisted of professional warrior monks dedicated to warfare in the Baltic. The military campaigns were brutal. Instead of large set-piece engagements, much of the fighting consisted of raids, ambushes, sieges, and punitive expeditions. Crusader columns advanced along rivers, attacking villages suspected of supporting resistance. Local warriors responded by launching surprise attacks against isolated garrisons and supply routes. By the end of the first decade of the 13th century, the Crusaders had secured much of the lower Daugava region. The Crusaders now turned towards what's today Estonia. The first major incursions began in 1208 when forces of the Livonian Brothers of the Sword crossed into southern Estonia. Their campaigns followed a familiar pattern. Villages were raided, supplies seized, and strongholds attacked. The objective was not merely military victory but the establishment of permanent control. Unlike many Western European armies, Estonian forces relied heavily on local knowledge and mobility. They could move quickly through forests and marshes, striking unexpectedly before withdrawing. Their hill forts provided defensive positions where communities could gather during times of danger. According to later Danish accounts, local forces launched a surprise attack against the Danish camp during the Battle of Lindaniza. The fighting was intense, and at one stage the Danes reportedly faced defeat. Legend claims that during the battle a red banner bearing a white cross descended from the heavens. Throughout the 1220s, Crusader armies conducted increasingly coordinated operations. German knights, Danish forces, bishops, and the Brothers of the Sword worked together against remaining centers of resistance. Fleets of ships were also raiding coastal areas. In 1227, a large Crusader expedition targeted the island directly. After a major siege, the defenders were forced to surrender. The fall of Zarma marked the collapse of organized Estonian resistance. By then, most of Estonia have been conquered. If you think that this already sounds bad, when you ain't seen nothing yet, because the worst is to come. While the Crusaders were fighting in Livonia and Estonia, another frontier was drawing the attention of Christian Europe. South of the Baltic coast lived the Prussians. These Prussian peoples were not German. They were a collection of Baltic tribes related more closely to Lithuanians and Latvians than to their western neighbors. They lived in a land of forests, rivers, lakes, and marshes stretching between the lower Vistula River and the Baltic Sea. Like many other peoples of the region, they remained pagan. Prussian religion centered on sacred groves, natural sites, and ancestral traditions. Political authority was decentralized. Each tribe maintained its own leaders, warriors, and strongholds. For generations, neighboring Christian rulers had attempted to conquer or convert them. Most efforts ended in failure. The order he contacted was the Teutonic Order. Founded during the Crusades in the Holy Land, the Teutonic Knights combined monastic discipline with military organization. Their members took religious vows, but they were also professional soldiers. Unlike temporary crusading armies, they were designed for long-term warfare. In 1226, the order received crucial legal backing through the Golden Bull of Rimini, issued by Emperor Frederick II. The Teutonic Knights were no longer merely assisting local rulers. They intended to build a state of their own. The first campaigns focused on securing the frontier along the Vistula River. Rather than attempting a rapid conquest of all Prussia, the order advanced methodically. They captured territory, constructed fortifications, and then used those positions as bases for further operations. Castle building became their most important weapon. Whenever the knights occupied an area, they immediately began constructing defensive strongholds. Early forts were often wooden structures, but many were later replaced by massive brick castles. These castles served multiple purposes. They housed garrisons, stored supplies, protected settlers, and projected authority into surrounding regions. Most importantly, they allowed the order to remain in conquered territory throughout the year. Military operations usually took place during winter. Frozen rivers and marshes made movement easier for heavily armed troops. Terrain that hindered armies during warmer months became far more accessible once frozen solid. Year after year, crusading expeditions arrived from Germany. Nobles, knights, and volunteers joined seasonal campaigns against the Prussians. Some came for religious reasons, others sought glory, land, or military experience. The order skillfully integrated these temporary forces into its broader strategy. Each campaign pushed the frontier slightly farther east. By the late 1230s, several important tribes had been defeated or brought under control. Missionaries followed the armies, churches appeared in conquered territories, and Christian administration began replacing traditional tribal structures. Yet the conquest was far from complete. Many tribes continued to resist. The Prussian tribes had not been fully defeated, only contained, and in 1260, events beyond Prussia itself triggered the largest uprising in the history of the Baltic Crusades. That year, a major crusading force was defeated at the Battle of Derba. The defeat was catastrophic for the crusading coalition. It shattered the perception of invincibility that the military orders had carefully built over decades. News of the defeat spread quickly. Across Prussia, tribes that had submitted under pressure now saw an opportunity. They rose almost simultaneously. What followed was not a single revolt, but a coordinated collapse of Crusader authority across the region. Fortresses that had taken years to build suddenly became isolated islands of resistance in a hostile landscape. The uprising spread rapidly through major Prussian regions. Tribal leaders coordinated attacks on castles, supply routes, and settlements. Communication between Crusaders' strongholds was cut. Reinforcement became difficult and dangerous. One of the most important leaders of the rebellion was Hircus Monti. He had been educated in the West and understood Crusader tactics. This made him especially dangerous. He combined local knowledge with an understanding of how the Teutonic Order fought. Garrisons were reduced to defensive survival. Supply lines broke down. Communication between the Order's major strongholds became unreliable. The Order was forced into a defensive war across multiple fronts. Instead of expanding, it now fought to hold what remained. Slowly, the balance began to shift. One by one, Crusader reinforcements stabilized key fortresses. Supply lines were reopened. Isolated castles were relieved. By the early 1200s the final Prussian tribe was defeated and the Teutonic Order had control. By the end of the 13th century, the Teutonic Order had achieved what earlier crusading armies could not. Prussia had been conquered, fortified, settled, integrated into a new political system ruled by the Order. But to the east, a very different kind of power was emerging. The Grand Duchy of Lithuania. Unlike the fragmented tribes of Prussia, Lithuania had undergone political consolidation. Under strong rulers, multiple Baltic and Slavic groups were unified into a single expanding state. It was large, organized, and increasingly militarized. And unlike Prussia, it did not wait to be attacked. It struck first. Lithuanian forces conducted deep raids into Crusader territory, targeting newly settled regions in Prussia and Livonia. These were not random raids, they were strategic operations aimed at destabilizing the frontier. Villages were burned, supplies destroyed, settlers captured or driven out. The goal was simple: prevent the crusading state from becoming secure. In response, the Teutonic Order adapted its entire military system. The age of rapid conquest was over. What followed was a new kind of warfare, a permanent frontier conflict. Crusading warfare against Lithuania became highly seasonal. Each year, large expeditions known as Rysen would assemble from across Europe. Knights from the Holy Roman Empire, France, and other regions joined these campaigns, seeking religious merit and military prestige. These were not settled armies. They were rotating forces of elite warriors. They would march into Lithuanian territory, raid fortifications, attempt sieges, and then withdraw before winter made campaigning impossible. Instead, Lithuanian forces relied on mobility and avoidance. They retreated deep into forests, destroyed supplies before enemy armies could use them, and struck only when conditions were favorable. The result was frustration on both sides. The Crusaders could not achieve permanent victory. The Lithuanians could not be fully subdued. Geography played a decisive role. Dense forests, rivers, and vast undeveloped territory made sustained occupation extremely difficult. Unlike Prussia, Lithuania could absorb invasions and continue functioning as a unified state. Ironically, Crusader pressure strengthened Lithuanian state formation. Prussia had been conquered and transformed into a territorial state ruled by the Teutonic Order. Livonia and Estonia were divided between bishoprics, city-states, and crusading authorities. Lithuania, once the last major pagan power in Europe, had become a centralized and expanding kingdom. In 1386, the ruler of Lithuania, Jogaila, accepted Christianity and became king of Poland. This created a dynastic union between Poland and Lithuania, two major powers that now stood on the same side of Christendom. Eventually the Northern Crusades came to an end, and the Teutonic Order would eventually be kicked out of the Baltic. They reshaped the map of northeastern Europe. They led to the creation of new states, the spread of Christianity, and the rise of powerful military and trading systems. In Prussia, Livonia, Estonia, and Lithuania, entire societies were transformed or erased. New identities emerged from the intersection of conquest and survival. The Teutonic Order continued to exist as a charitable and ceremonial body. It operates with hospitals, clinics, and care facilities for the elderly, disabled, and those struggling with addiction across Central Europe.